Agenda for 1:30 is the school turnaround, state review panel recommendations. Do we have everyone that we need online for that? Max Lang?
Present.
Okay. We'll go ahead and allow you to introduce this agenda item.
Sure, thank you. And I must say it's good to see board members in the boardroom. It looks like progress towards normalcy, so it's good to see. My name is Max Lang. I'm a school improvement specialist for the board. The purpose of this particular agenda item is for the board to hear a state review panel recommendations regarding the exit status and for the board to determine exit status of 6 schools in school turnaround. The exit status of each of these schools would have been determined based on the 2019-2020 results from the school accountability system. And if I can draw the board members' attention to the backup for agenda item 13, there are copies of the presentations that were provided by the school teams to the state review panel. The document that I will be referencing in those materials is called Turnaround Panel Exit Recommendations Final. That's the one. At this time, I'd like to recognize and thank the teams from these schools that are able to attend today. And just for the board's information, it looks like a number of them, if not all, schools are being represented today, so that if you have questions, you can direct them to those particular team members. And then on board with me, part of the USBE team, we have Tracy Van Deventer, Ann Michelle Neal, and Leslie Evans. Provide just a brief background. On April 2nd, 2020, the board waived the exit retirements for the school turnaround rule R277-920 and directed that a state review panel be formed to review each school's data and make a recommendation to the board as to whether the school has demonstrated substantial improvement to exit the program. So there were originally 9 members on that panel. When we successfully stole Tracy Van Deventer away from Ogden as the director for the Utah Center for Continuous School Improvement, we added her to the list to make a total of 10 on the state review panel. The board created on April 2nd the following guiding questions to which the schools presented substantial achievement and growth through the alternative data of the school accountability system. There were 3 of these guiding questions. The first one, which all 6 of these schools fulfilled, did the school achieve above the lowest 3% threshold using the 2018-2019 school accountability data measures? Because to exit a school in turnaround has to achieve above the lowest 3% threshold for 2 consecutive years. 2018-19 would have been the first of those 2. 2019-2020 would have been the second. The second guiding question, can the school provide evidence of substantial progress and growth in addition to the data in the accountability system? And the third guiding question, does the school have qualitative and/or quantitative data from the implementation of a school turnaround plan that also demonstrates substantial improvement? So the state review panel, the expectation in determining each school's substantial progress, growth, and improvement was that the school teams presented evidence in response to each of the board's 3 guiding questions, specifically responding to guiding questions 2 and 3. So here's a quick timeline in that document that shows between April and today some of the actions that were fulfilled in coming to this board meeting. And I draw particular attention to the July 29th, 30th. This was the time when the 6 schools presented to the state review panel. They presented live. At least 9 of the 10 members of the state review panel were present at each of those. They were interactive, meaning we could ask questions and allow for the school teams to respond. And below here, this is a chart that shows the state review panel recommendations per each of the board guiding questions. And the schools are listed in the order that they presented to the review panel. So there are 5 columns. The left column simply has the school, the state review panel's recommendation, the data that speaks to whether the school met the threshold 3%. Guiding question 2, can the school provide evidence of substantial progress and growth in addition to the data in the accountability system? Guiding question 3, does the school have qualitative and or quantitative data from the implementation of its school turnaround plan that also demonstrates substantial improvement? The 5th category, the panel added recommendations for next steps for your purview. The remarks are highlights in each of these columns. It's not it's a summary just highlighting some of the reasons that the board or the panel made the specific recommendations. I kind of pause at this time, Chair, to ask the question. We have representation, I think, from almost all of the schools. So I'm wondering how to proceed, or what would be the most efficient way to proceed through here. If you'd like me to kind of just highlight some of the areas that and the recommendations for each school, and then pause to allow for questions for the state review panel members and the school teams, I can do that, or let me know what would be the most efficient way to do that.
Yes, please. If you could progress and just point out the highlights of each school, we'll go through that. And then if there's any board member questions, we'll ask those all at once for either we'll have board members address the questions specifically, whether it's to the review panel or to the school representative. Okay,
great. Thank you very much. So the first school, and this is Whitehorse High School, is a school from cohort 1 that was granted an extension for 2 years. 2018-19 would have been the second year of their extension. The state review panel is recommending exit status for Whitehorse High School. They achieved above the 3% threshold. Guiding question 2, some of the highlights is an increased graduation rate, a 9th grade ELA benchmark data increase in proficiency, Math 1 benchmark data increase, from 1 to 4 benchmark, and an ACT average composite score increase. Guiding question 3 with regards to the school turnaround plan, there was a student engagement increase substantially, an increase in the percent of scholars completing their readiness coursework, a school transformation team designed and delivered professional learning, and then I would let Kim talk about this one, but they established a parent book club, which was a joy to hear about. Recommended next steps. The board thought that it would be a good practice to continue emphasis on the readiness coursework and to continue to explore opportunities to integrate culturally relevant curriculum materials. Utah Virtual Academy. The panel is recommending that Utah Virtual Academy exit school turnaround. Guiding question 1, they achieved above the 3% threshold. Guiding question 2, with reference to addition to the data in the accountability system, they had NWEA data that showed continued growth in math and ELA proficiency. They had an overall MGP that was over the state average in comparison, and a 73% overall growth for the lowest 25%, which is an indicator in the state accountability system compared to the state. For guiding question 3, they have more than doubled ACT participation, an increase in graduation rate, an improvement in teacher retention, and this is a virtual school, and then credit deficiencies. 70% of students either closed the gap or were on track to closing. Some of the panel's recommendations for next steps: continue to focus on math and science, continue to track data specific to student groups to avoid a TSI designation. The next school, Paradigm High School. The state review panel recommends that Paradigm High School hold and turnaround status for the 2021 school year. Guiding question 1, Paradigm High achieved above the 3% threshold. And guiding question 2 with regards to additional data to the accountability system, there were a couple of items that gave the panel cause that were highlighted. Although ELA scores show consistent growth, math and science didn't show the same consistent growth trajectory. And there's a table there that just kind of demonstrates that for math and science. That same is true for ACT percentages who scored 18 or above in those years, and the percentage of students enrolled in readiness coursework, and the same inconsistent trajectory and graduation rates between 17 and Paradigm's projection for 2020. Based on the panel's understanding for guiding question 3 from Paradigm's presentation, there's an emphasis on oral and written exams around classical text for ELA progress. However, there's a lack of demonstrated progress monitoring data for math and science. Evidence does suggest that Paradigm is in the early stages of implementation of school improvement plan with regards to Utah course standards. And this was a perception of the state review panel that there's a suggested reluctance to use curriculum-based criterion reference data for systemic decision-making. Recommendations of the panel for next steps: increase Utah core focused instruction with progress monitoring and data review cycles. Dixie Montessori Academy. The panel is recommending exit status from school turnaround. Guiding question 1, Dixie Montessori achieved above the 3% threshold. Guiding question 2, there is an increase in overall ELA proficiency, math proficiency, and science proficiency. An overall increase in the MGP for ELA, math, and science. And there's a growth from the lowest 25% from 2017 to 2019. Highlights from guiding question number 3. There are positive changes in leadership. There is a stricter alignment of the Utah core standards to Montessori strategies, new Tier 1 curriculum in literacy, math, and science, increased focus on progress monitoring, and continued professional development for teachers and leadership. Recommended next steps by the panel: continue to delegate shared leadership tasks to new leaders and program directors. All of those in column 3 that you see at positive changes in leaderships, I think all of those titles were held by Chelsea, the director, previously. And the panel recommends to build teacher retention strategies. Kennedy Junior High School. The State Review Panel is recommending exit status for Kennedy Junior High. Guiding question 1, Kennedy achieved above the bottom 3% threshold. Guiding question 2, overall achievement data, ELA, math, and science increased. The overall MGP between 2017 and 2019, ELA and math and science increased. And the demonstrated favorable data in comparison to 15 other district junior high schools. Guiding question number 3, there was strong evidence of shared leadership and leadership committees to work on each strategy in the school turnaround plan. PLC focused on student data. They created collaborative coaching model resulting in 100 peer observations in 2020. And there's an emphasis in writing across the curriculum, resulting in 78% of the teachers responding that they had seen improvement in the writing skills. So recommendations from the panel for next steps: continue to work with collaborative coaching and continue with data review, focusing on priority standards. Guadalupe School. The panel is recommending that Guadalupe School exit turnaround status. Guiding question 1, Guadalupe achieved above the 3% threshold. Guiding question 2, their overall achievement data in ELA, math, and science improved from 2017 to 2019. Overall MGP between 2017 and ELA, math, and science increased. Growth of the lowest 25% increased substantially from 2017 to 2019. and there's substantial growth in WIDA scores above the state average. Guiding question 3. There are a large number of teachers trained in next steps and Wilson reading. Was part of their plan. Reduction in staff turnover, a substantial reduction in staff turnover, created consistent use of benchmark data collection and data analysis, and they presented that they had reduced behavior office referrals. Panel recommendations for next steps continue to build on data review cycles, implementing interventions, continue substantial achievement and growth. This is a kind of I guess, a warning and an acknowledgement of further moving forward with CSI identification or TSI identification. Continue substantial achievement and growth must occur for Guadalupe in order to rank above the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools, so they're not identified for CSI in the next cycle. It looks like I missed a couple of items in each column that you can see. So those are the 6 schools. Those are the state review panel's recommendation for exit. For each of the board's guiding questions, there is data there for the first guiding question showing where the school scored on 1819 data above the 3% threshold. And then guiding questions 2 and 3, there are just some panel highlights from those presentations. So I'll turn the time over to you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions from board members? Okay, before we get into your questions, people online are having a hard time hearing board members. So speak directly into your mic. Don't tilt your head to the side. Speak directly into your mic and or remove your mask when you're speaking. Okay. Board Member Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. Is it okay to address Max through?
Yes, please.
You? Okay. Max, I see the panel and who made up that panel, and they all look great. I'm going to ask a question about paradigm and the reasoning behind the decision to not take them out of turnaround status, and wondering how much of this decision was based on the presentation that was made to the panel. And secondly, understanding that the school is a liberal arts school. Typically, liberal arts students may not do all that well in STEM-related activities and coursework. If you could clarify the decision-making behind that statement in your guiding question remarks when it came to the grades related to science and technology, and if in fact that they have seen significant and substantial improvements, which I've seen some data. We heard from Linnell this morning in public comment, and she mentioned some things, but if you could just speak to some of those comments or some of those questions as to specifically why they were not recommended to exit turnaround.
Sure, Chair, is that okay?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I will give just, there are 10 members on the state review panel. There was a lot of discussion post-presentation. I think we may have even followed up with a couple of questions after that. I think just overall in a general statement, and then I'll defer to Tracy to pitch in and Leslie. I notice there's also a couple of other members that were on the state review panel who may have thoughts in addition. But what the state review panel was doing really was looking at a substantial, so I think, the phrase is specifically progress and growth in addition to the data. So it's substantial progress and growth in the data from the accountability system. I think for guiding question 1, what gave the board or the panel pause was that the scores or the percentages they were not a consistent trajectory. They dipped in year 2 and then increased again there in year 3. And then The other remark that I have is that the panel tried to review each guiding question, that there was evidence to show substantial improvement, substantial growth and progress in each of those things. So that second one was equally as important, and it was qualitative and or quantitative data from the implementation of the school turnaround plan that demonstrated substantial improvement. And I think overall that there was some hesitancy that the panel felt was shared through the presentation in regards to curriculum-based, criterion-referenced data for making some of those decisions. There was a lot of progress in ELA, but not quite as much in math or science. And then, like I said, I'll defer to Tracy, Leslie, and other members of the panel that are available who can make additional comments.
Chair, if I could speak?
Yes, please.
To add to that, and Max, thank you so much. I think you were very clear. I want to highlight that Paradigm and all the others would not have been invited if they hadn't reached the criteria that's listed in the column for question 1, above that 3%. I think that as we look at the other 2 questions, we definitely were challenged in trying to identify what is going on at each of these schools. And what I heard in listening to the panel was that it's amazing and powerful that they do have this emphasis in liberal arts and this language arts focus, but because they are a public charter school, they have that obligation to continue work in that math and science area as well. And we didn't see the evidence of that work and that monitoring and that continued focus on the data to verify that their systems are in place and continuing to expand.
So,
Did you have a follow-up question?
follow-up question,
Board Member
yes, if
Haynes?
I
Go
may.
ahead.
So the oral presentation that was made to the panel, if that presentation was maybe lacking, would that have made an impact? I mean, was there enough quantitative data in the results that you had before you, enough to make a decision, or was that oral presentation that was made, was the decision based on how that was made or presented?
Chair, if I may?
Yes, please.
Again, I think when we look at the way that the questions are phrased that we were given as a review panel, can the school provide evidence of substantial progress and growth in addition? And then also, does the school have qualitative and or qualitative data from the implementation? Those were the questions that were guiding us, and it's difficult for us to know whether there was sufficient. We assumed that we were getting all of the information that was available in those presentations, and it was difficult for us to make an assumption whether or not there was more data that just wasn't shared. It's possible that it was incomplete, and we were looking at all the standards that are measured when we're looking at that percentile ranking. So it is possible that there were some limitations in regards to the way that the information was presented. We made the decisions based on the information that was presented with a highlight on all 3 questions. Hope that answers your question.
Okay.
Do you have a follow-up?
I just wondered when the next time would be to review this again. Is that, if they don't come out of turnaround, is that a full year before that's reviewed again, or is there another date that will be reviewed and assessed?
Max, would you like to address that question? So what's the timing on turnaround? So if this is not, so would Paradigm come back in a year? Is that the correct timeline?
So, yes, Chair, thank you. So the exit status would be determined based on school accountability results at the end of the 2021 school year. I'm assuming that's correct, Darren.
Oh, it would be 9 months?
Chair, can I add a few comments?
Oh,
Is that Darren?
This is Darren Nielsen.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so So I want to back up just a little bit. With the suspension of state assessments in 2020, it interrupted the normal process for cohort 1 and cohort 2 schools to be exited. And that process typically relies heavily on state accountability data. The board, as you recall, in the spring of 2020, authorized this process which I thought was a very responsive way to handle these schools who've been in the turnaround program and receiving additional supports for a number of years. I was a member of the committee, the review panel, and it was a pleasure to be able to review the materials that each of these schools presented, and also an opportunity to meet with them and discuss the work they've been doing over the last several years. And the federal program, which was also interrupted for our targeted schools for improvement and comprehensive schools for improvement, the federal program didn't allow that opportunity. So each of the schools who had the classification for comprehensive school support and targeted school support, we were required to hold them constant through this year and then re-implement, assuming that we have assessment data at the conclusion of the 2021 school year, just to start that engine back up and start to initiate that process that's been in place previously. So at the end of the 21 year, we're hopeful that we'll be able to, again, initiate that process that we've typically followed, the pattern that is written into the rule. This opportunity that the board provided these schools to take a closer look and really examine things beyond just assessment scores. I know representatives from Paradigm High talked about assessment scores earlier this morning, and we take some question with some of those comparisons that were shared this morning. But regardless of that, we really focused not just on the data. The data, as Tracy mentioned, that was the trigger to get into the review process, but really wanted to take a close look at how are the schools implementing the plans that they've established with their turnaround experts, and what is the third-party vendor who monitors that and provides technical support to those schools as well. What are they saying about what practices they're seeing put in place? And then our decision really based on trying to determine whether we believe the substantial progress that they've made is substantial enough to ensure that when the supports for turnaround are pulled away, will they be able to continue on the trajectory they're on currently? And we took, as one member of that panel, I can assure you, we took that decision very seriously and made the decision with this particular school that we felt that an additional year of supports that come with the turnaround classification would be beneficial for them and would enhance our confidence in their ability to continue making that progress.
Board Member Cannon.
Thank you.
Chair, this is Assistant Superintendent Voorhees. Could I add a comment?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Leah Voorhees, Assistant Superintendent of Student Support. I was also a member of the review panel, and I'd like to add one piece of information to address Board Member Haynes' question, and that is we gave all of the schools the opportunity to send us their presentations a couple weeks before they actually presented to us, so we could review them, we could provide feedback that then they could address when they presented to us in person. And we found that process very helpful because it gave us more time as individual review panel members to look at the data that they presented and ask questions about the data, give the schools an opportunity to respond to those questions in their presentation and or in written materials that they submitted to us. And so to Board Member Haynes's question, the 30 minutes of time, hour long of time that the schools had to present was not the only opportunity that we had to look at their data. I actually spent several hours looking at the data personally of each of those schools when they submitted it to us prior to the presentation. And really, as Superintendent Nielsen said, really was impressed by the work that the schools had done, was grateful for the thoughtful plans that had been put together by these schools, and the opportunities that they took to really look at their systems and improve systems. And to the question of the paradigm data, for me, the lack of a very strong and unidirectional trajectory on their scores was one of the most influential factors for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Board Member Cannon.
Yes, we are looking here at cohort 1 and cohort 2. Would you just go through for me and tell me, as I understand it, turnaround is generally a 3-year process. Would you go through each of these schools and tell me how many years each of them has been in turnaround? And then I have a
Chairman.
follow-up.
Yes, please.
So Whitehorse High School is the one cohort 1 school that is, so at the end of their 3 years, and you're correct, it's a 3-year designation for school turnaround. The school is identified year 1 and 2 years of implementation. At the end of the 3rd year, based on the state accountability results, if that school has been above that bottom 3% threshold for 2 consecutive years, they exit. Cohort 1 is slightly different. The exit criteria for cohort 1 schools was that they improve at least 1 letter grade by the end of the 3rd year. So Whitehorse High School is kind of, they're kind of at, utilizing these 3 guiding questions, particularly the first guiding question that they're above the 3% threshold based on 18-19 data. They're slightly different, but yeah, those are the 3 years. So cohort 1 would have been identified in 15-16, 16-17, 17-18 would have been the 3 years for exit, plus 2 years of extension. Cohort 2 schools, the first year they were identified 17-18, 18-19, 19-20 would have been the 3rd year for turnaround.
So when you identified Whitehorse as being cohort 1, what about these other schools?
They're cohort 2 schools.
All the rest are cohort 2 schools that are essentially coming out on time. So my follow-up question is, I know, and I think this may be one of the reasons you're thinking about maintaining some help for Paradigm High, is that one thing we don't want to have happen is to invest all the time, effort, and money into these schools and then have them fall back into turnaround. Do we have any schools where that has happened, that they've exited turnaround and then come back into turnaround?
Chair, may I?
Yes, please.
We did have, off the top of my head, I can think of one school that was identified in cohort 1, and then I think they were re-identified in cohort 3. So there would have been a span of years, but yes, that has happened.
All right, and I guess our goal would be to prevent that from happening. And as I look at Paradigm High School and the reasoning you've given us, it seems to me like the idea about making sure that they're on the right track would be the one reason to keep them an additional year in turnaround. Is there a downside for them? I know turnaround provides a lot more money, a lot more assistance. Is there a downside for them about remaining one more year?
Chair, may I?
Yes, you may. You can just go ahead and answer any of the questions that are posed by board members.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess I see that Fernando is present and at this meeting, and I think I would defer that question to him to answer as the principal of Paradigm.
Thank you, and thank you for your review. The question is, about the trajectory. I noticed that.
Sorry to
at least
interrupt.
one other school.
Sorry, just for
Yes.
our minutes, do you mind introducing your full name and your position, please? Thank you.
No problem. Fernando Seminario. I'm the director at Paradigm Schools.
Thank you.
There are other schools. Of all the schools that you're reviewing today, we are the farthest away from the bottom 3% at 30%. We all started about the same place, and we've made the most progress away. You have another school that you read today who's only at 3.9% from the bottom. Based on the reason that was given, there would be greater concern for schools that are closer to the bottom 3 to repeat that than our school, who is farthest away. I think that needs to be considered. I agree that we perhaps didn't present as much of the additional non-state accountability data in our presentation. But I think to that point, it should therefore be noted that there is not substantial information and data and evidence to show that we wouldn't continue on a trajectory. I also would like to point out that our scores, as you saw, and Max, if you can scroll down to our column, I don't know if that's there, and just the ones that you presented there on the chart, we went up and down. And that year that we went up was a year that we did not have turnaround experts and working with us, which I think shows we have leadership capability to improve and address our scores. And when we went down the year, those proficiency levels are still higher than all of the other schools you're reviewing today. And it's a little bit frustrating to see that had we gone from a 15 to a 17 to a 20, that would have been considered a favorable, unidirectional trajectory. But because we went from a 15 to a 24 to a 22 or 20, that's somehow considered a negative. I appreciate your time. I don't think it's fair. I don't think in comparison to the other schools, since we are compared to the other schools, since all schools are compared to each other based on their distance from the bottom 3, that other schools would be exiting with lower ACT scores than a composite score than we have, and lower proficiency levels. It just doesn't make sense that other schools would be exited from turnaround with lower scores in some of the areas that we clearly did much better in.
I can hear your passion. I'm just wondering if you'll answer my question. Do you see a downside to remaining in turnaround an additional year?
Yes, the downside is that we've seen a direct negative impact to our enrollment because of the negative publicity and media. I'm sure there'll be a story tonight talking about which schools were exited and which ones weren't. Our name will be there. That's very damaging to our culture, to our reputation. And we don't feel that it actually tells the whole story. We had a high opt-out rate, 65% opt-out rate in our state testing, which was a large factor that put us into this, which is really high for the whole state. And we've worked hard to address that. We've shown improvement in growth in all the areas. We would have obviously some funding complications because of our low enrollment. And that's very serious. And of course, our staff morale, we've worked hard. We've shown we moved the farthest away from the bottom 3% of all the schools you're reviewing today. And then COVID, we'll be having to do this. We'll be the only school of this group that will have to do what we're going to be asked to do during the COVID year, which we know is just unusual and unknown. And so that's also a big concern to us. I realize other cohorts might have to do as well, but we'll be the only school in this group that'll have to show greater improvement now during this very unusual school year.
Board Member Earl? No? Okay. I just have one quick question while you're still on. You mentioned your opt-out rates. Has that changed since you were identified?
Yes, thank you. Interestingly enough, in that 2018 year where we had the highest of our scores of the 3 that are presented, that was the year we did not have turnaround experts. The only thing we did as a school was address the opt-out rate. So we had more people taking the test, which we've always felt was a big, not the main, not the biggest, but one big factor in accountability for our school. Now, 2019 and 20, when we had the turnaround plan, we didn't address that because that wasn't part of what the root cause analysis determined, and we were mandated to stick to the 4 goals from that root cause analysis. So yeah, it's continuing to, it's improved. The opt-out rate has improved. But with our inability to incentivize or penalize for taking or not taking the test and remaining neutral, it's really hard to convince a lot of parents to not opt out. We've done our best to just describe our situation so that they can help the school. But yeah, we have addressed that to some degree.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? Board Member Belknap.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to make a motion that the board accept the recommendations of the School Turnaround State Review Panel for Whitehorse High School, Utah Virtual Academy, Dixie Montessori Academy, Kennedy Junior High School, and Guadalupe School to exit turnaround, and for Paradigm High School to hold in the current school turnaround status for the 2020-2021 school year.
The motion, excuse me, is there a second? Okay, the motion before us is that the board accept the recommendations of the School Turnaround State Review Panel for Whitehorse High School, Utah Virtual Academy, Dixie Montessori Academy, Kennedy Junior High School, the Guadalupe School to exit school turnaround, and for Paradigm High School to hold in the current school turnaround status for the 2020-2021 school year. Is there any discussion to that motion? Board Member Hansen.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask the panel to please respond to the principal's argument or reasoning on why they shouldn't be kept in turnaround. If the panel could help me with that, is that all right, Chair?
Yeah, so if there's any members of the panel who would like to speak to the concerns that the principal at not Guadalupe, Paradigm mentioned of their scores and their distance from the bottom 3%, is that correct, Board Member Hansen? Okay, thank you.
Chair, this is Derek
Yeah.
Nielsen. Can I speak? to
Yes,
that?
please, thank you.
Again, I'm just one member of the review panel, but I'll point out one data element that provided some pause for me as we considered whether we should remove the supports that Paradigm High School is currently receiving to help them make significant, meaningful changes to their academic programs. In 2017, the graduation rate, which is one of our lagging indicators, obviously, but it's also in our board's strategic mission statement and vision. It's the ultimate that our students graduate our high schools ready to prepare and lead and succeed. The graduation rate for Paradigm High School in 2017 was 72.7%. That's the year that they were identified. If the year before they were identified, it was 77%, and in 2015 it was 85%. So if we go back to 2017, it's 72.7%. The following year it was 73.7%, so stayed pretty consistent. Remembering that it takes some time to implement turnaround programs, and then it also takes some time for that to affect graduation rates. In 2019, it was 65.6%, the graduation rate, which again speaks to Assistant Superintendent Leovori's concern about just looking at data and trying to see if enough of the data we're looking at is pointed in the right trajectory. In 2020, this is preliminary because these numbers haven't been released yet. It's looking like it's 71.1%, which is still potentially below the year that they qualified for a cohort. So that's an example of one of the concerns that I had as I tried to make my vote as meaningful and as accurate as it could be.
Thank you. Are there any other panel members who'd like to answer that question? Okay.
Just a follow-up,
Follow-up,
Chair.
go ahead.
And this, we could do this after the vote. It's up to the chairman. But I'd like to hear, while we have all these turnaround school representatives online, what their experience was with turnaround and what they feel like the biggest takeaways have been from turnaround that have allowed them to change trajectory and move in a positive direction, but that may be after the vote. I don't.
Depending on time, we may invite them to send maybe something to the board, some information to the board in regard to lessons learned. Okay, Board Member Lear?
Thank you. I would like to know, maybe from Darren, if he's the right person, or Max, if this was a unanimous decision by this very auspicious group of educators. I am really reluctant. I hear what the Paradigm staff is saying. I'm sympathetic to that. But I feel like these very qualified educators have reviewed this carefully. And I'm reluctant to overcall that when I don't know, I haven't looked as closely at the data or discussed it or reviewed it in the detail they have. So I would like to know if this was a unanimous decision, and or if this was sort of even a borderline or a close call, or if they all universally felt like another year would be good. Kind of the sense of what how the panel discussion went.
This is Max Lang.
Yes.
That's a difficult question to answer. I think that there was a lot of discussion and there were a lot of considerations. I don't think that it was overwhelmingly unanimous, but I think what was presented and discussed, I think all members of the state review panel felt comfortable that there would be benefit in another year of supports and adherence to that turnaround plan to demonstrate, to ensure that there's a steady gain in the progress towards the goals in the plan. That's kind of just my read as to whether the state review panel was unanimous. We all came to a consensus.
Thank you.
Board Member Earl?
Yeah, so my question has to do with, so when we're talking about graduation rates, and maybe the principal can address this, I know sometimes, depending on if it's a different program, maybe in this case charter or other entities, sometimes kids don't graduate, but they just go right on to college. I'm just wondering if there's any reflection in that, or if there's any, if that's why the graduation rate's at 71%, or anyways, I'm just wondering about that, because sometimes different models have different reasons for that taking place. So I'm just curious on that.
Was that question directed to me? This is Mr. Seminario.
Yes, that is.
Yes, thanks for asking. We don't have, that's the first I'm hearing those preliminary numbers on graduation for this year. Our projections were much higher, as is in the report that Max shared with you. We thought it's closer to 91%. We have our school, as you may know or not know, was founded by homeschoolers, and we still attract a lot of homeschoolers who want a school experience for their high school years, who opt not to have a diploma, go straight to college. We're a small school, so even if you had 3 or 4 in a senior class, it really does affect our graduation rate, because they're not counted as graduating with their cohort. It's something we've known since, we've been around for 15 years. It's something we've dealt with from the start, from the first year, and we're aware of it. It does hurt our graduation rate, but to the point of growth, we've shown growth. That's the first time I'm hearing that number, graduation rate, for this year. So our projections show higher, and the highest in the last 5 years, and for this last year that we had, and we think that that's a great indication. Not only, but it's higher compared to all the other schools that you're reviewing today.
Okay. Board Member Belknap, your hand is up. Was that from before? Do you have a question?
I'd like to call the question, please.
Okay, so Board Member Nielsen, is that you?
Yes, it is.
Okay, just thank you for joining us. Okay, so the motion is to call the question. All in favor of calling the question, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? You're opposed? Okay. Board Member Belknap.
Aye.
Board Member Bolter.
Aye.
Board Chair Huntsman.
Aye.
Board Member Nielsen.
Aye.
Okay, so that motion passes. Okay, the motion before us then, so that ends debate on this discussion. The motion before us is that the board accept the recommendations of the School Turnaround State Review Panel for White Horse High School, Utah Virtual Academy, Dixie Montessori Academy, Kennedy Junior High School, and Guadalupe School to exit school turnaround, and for Paradigm High School to hold in the current school turnaround status for the 2020-2021 school year. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay. Board Member Belknap?
Aye.
Okay. Board Member Bolter?
Aye.
Chair Huntsman? Chair Huntsman?
Aye.
Board Member Nielsen?
Aye.
Okay. That motion passes. Okay, with Board Member Earl, Board Member Haynes, and myself voting no. Lorraine, do you need any additional information on that motion?
No, I think I have it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. We would like to invite all of the schools who presented today to send it maybe an email message through the board secretary, just sharing in honor of Board Member Hansen's request, sharing any lessons learned or thoughts that you had on the turnaround process. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today.